Well read. What are we talking about today?
Today, Matsy, we're talking about Rom V's New Gods, issue 3, where Rom V takes us a step back. He does a little bit of world building here and describes to us the origins of the second world. Goes back into ancient times, and we find what exactly happened in that old world prior to the setting of the fourth world, where a new god is created. And then we catch up again with Mr. Miracle, who's in Earth of this time with Big Berta, arguing about childcare as they go off to try to find the new god and determine its fate. So there is threats looming. There was a conflict that occurred on Apocalypse. The fate of that world is still hanging in the balance and quite uncertain, but Rom V taking a step back here to give us a little bit of setting and background of all the different worlds for which the new gods are set in. Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
So, on paper, this is a comic that's got good art and it's got some interesting lore. And it's just not doing it for me. And I think
Oh no.
and the new gods is something that I've tried to like multiple times. And it's one of those things where if you're a big fan of comics, it's almost like wouldn't call it maybe a Citizen Kane, but it's one of those like, it's like The Godfather. It's one of those like, cinematic
It's
masterpieces you're
pretty much
supposed.
obligatory that you have to read it and probably like it.
Yeah, and every time I try, I can get through part of it before I just kind of throw up my arms and go, I just and I feel like the mainstream opinion on the New Gods is kind of similar. It's like we took pieces that we liked, like we love Darkseid. And so Darkseid becomes just like rank and file member of the DC universe, no, unapologetically. But a bunch of the other stuff just never quite, sticks. Metron sticks around. He's really cool. His awesome space time chair. But then a bunch of the other stuff is just weird and awkward, like the Black Racer, and you got a guy on skis who's the personification of death or whatever. And in this issue, I don't know, it just became like a mixture of Indian mythology and of some other nods to other myths, and I don't know, like the whole thing about the fourth world was that it was supposed to be a postmodern space god thing, and now we're just making it just part of a regular mythology. um and Beautiful artwork, very nice, but I don't know, like I said, just it's just not clicking for me, and it just feels like every time I try to get into the New Gods, I run into this very point where it's just I get gate kept. I get gate kept every time, and I feel like I'm getting gate kept here.
What is it about? See, that's fascinating because I mean, so much of mainstream comic lore feels like the New Gods to me, where it's just we're painting this picture up in the air with all this clearly made up stuff, and then but at some point you have to ground it, and you're going to ground it in these, you know, these like character moments with their actual like kind of grounded tensions and their dynamics, and who's married to who and who's having a kid, that kind of thing. And that's what New Gods, at least this edition of New Gods, is foregrounding. So I think they're doing, to me, I think they're doing the work, so to speak, to tip their hat to like the obligatory kind of lore building stuff that New Gods is known for. I don't know if you could soft reboot New Gods and not do that, is my impression, but you have to pair it with something like like incredibly grounded, I think. And that's a real challenge. It can feel like, and this run is in danger of feeling like 2 comics kinda smashed together, and it might not help actually that it's 2 different illustrators
Mhm.
doing the lore and the grounded, family dynamic stuff. But, to me, I when I seriously got into comics to the point that I wanted to make them, it was from the anthology craze of the 2000s, where we were exposed to all, any and every kind of artistic, stylized expression, and you can mash up, different illustrators, they could team up to tell a story from different angles, and this kind of sings in that direction to me, where, we could have stuff that feels kinda like just kinda straight up concept arty with a textured paper feel for the lore, and then you got something that's probably I don't know, I wouldn't even say it's quite in mainstream wheelhouse, 'cause there's not a lot of spot blacks and stuff. The second illustrator that does the family stuff, that's both very expressive and exceedingly different. But I mean, to your point, I can see how it just starts to feel a little bit of a collage of stuff that they feel that has to happen, that they have to do well, but maybe it doesn't have a coherent vision, the way and I've heard people criticize the New Gods. I mean, we've heard this, I think, for 50 years that it doesn't have a coherent vision. So
Yeah.
maybe it's still kind of struggling with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's had a hard time this series forming a narrative. Everything seems to revolve around this child and some foreboding tension that might occur at some point there with all these other events that are happening around that may or may not be connected. That's the issue I have with this particular issue, where, as you mentioned, Matsy, the world building feels obligatory, but totally detached from any of the main narrative. Like, why did we have to go so far back? Like, what was the point for this one particular story to go so far back and then to diverge to there's two different settings. There's a character who is a blacksmith who seems to have some importance in the second world, and then the second world is dying out, and then it skips the third, it leads into the fourth, and then the creation of this child. I think the entire story, a lot of the world building and the backstory could have been told in one panel as kind of a flashback or somebody just telling of a legacy, not necessarily going through it in extensive detail, but picking up at the moment of the child being created, because that is the the main thread that we want to follow throughout this current series. That's where a lot of the tension and interest is happening, and that's the aspects of the story that need to be explored and divulged further. And then to totally go off on this tangent of the marital, uh, bliss, non-bliss, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
the marital consternations between Big Berta and Mr. Miracle to fill in the characterization and the grounding aspect of this. It's a it's a hodgepodge, quite frankly. And
Big
I
Bertha.
yeah, I'm just I can't, yeah, I I can't invest enough to get the names right. But yeah, it's just hard to really feel, interested, frankly, because what are we supposed to be interested in exactly in this stew?
I feel so bad because, like I said, I feel like I should like this, and part of it is because finally we got Matt interested in a superhero comic, because I think this one is the most like Kyrie that I've seen. Just like it's the most Kyrie-esque superhero work, and so I can see the common spirit there. And for me, like I said, it's just it's so disconnected, I guess, from the things I'm usually looking for.
Like,
So
would they showed me go Beckley Tepe? Do you remember that moment? You probably did. You were like, "Oh, this is just another thing they made up."
Hmm.
But, like, um, it's like a 10,000-year-old, settlement in, uh, Eastern Turkey.
mhm.
And they were like, and they start to highlight, like, "Look, there's a little, there's a owl and a snake." that's symbolizing this culture hero who came down, this Promethean culture hero who came down and gave civilization across the planet. And he's actually the same culture hero and across all these cultures. That's an interesting way. I mean, to kind of button up a point that I was making probably not very successfully earlier, is that you do have to tie if you're gonna paint these kind of weird starry pictures of this completely made up stuff, at some point you tie it down into the grounded kind of character moments, but it's also very helpful if you tie it down into, history or historical fiction or it actually has to loop into stuff that we do already know about and maybe Gobekli Tepe is too esoteric or obscure for people.
So I don't think it's about that because like I said,
Yeah.
Prester John shows up in in Marvel.
Yeah, it was
You know what I mean?
pretty
Like so Marvel was no stranger. A whole bunch of Marvelites learned a ton of Norse mythology through
yeah.
having Marvel stories basically just pull some of the deep cuts from like Norse mythology, for example. And that's just one example. And so it's not that, oh, we can't do the deep cuts. We usually have a certain flavor. Like I said, Norse gets pulled a lot more than, like, for example, like Turkish myth. But there's the myths that, superhero comics do pull, like I said, they'll do the deepest cuts. I think the thing that really hurts the New Gods is what your instinct there, Matt, about the groundedness. And the thing is that the New Gods have never been that grounded,
Mm,
because even Superman, who essentially is very godlike, Superman is always got the duality of being Clark Kent and
yeah,
having that very normal,
that helps.
even mundane at times life, the day to day with Lois Lane and holding down a job. And so people get to follow that and then project themselves. So they see themselves in Clark and they project themselves as Superman. And the New Gods are always just the New Gods. And so
Oh,
there's
that's huge.
very
Yeah.
so like they're trying. You can, it's like there's an attempt here by taking Mr. Miracle and giving him the family. So there's that attempt, but the I guess what's not work, it's just not enough. The overall weight of the work is just myths, and honestly, superheroes
Great
are only
point.
half myth. They're demigods. That's the whole point, because they always have one foot in the god zone and one foot firmly planted in the day to day Peter Parker being late for class.
Dang it, you
That
pushed me out. I have to hate this now.
No, I didn't
You're
say I have
so
to hate
right.
it. I
You're
didn't say yet.
absolutely right.
I didn't say I have to hate it. Like I said, what's
They're
interesting,
demigods. When they're done well, they're demigods. You're right.
and like I said, so there's like I said, but New Gods have the fan base that like them passionately like them. Like I said, I there's a gate. I always get gate kept, and I think this is the issue that started to gatekeep me.
I still think Walter Simonson did Orion perfectly. So I don't accept the idea that New Gods can't be done well as a principle. There are exceptions to that rule. So
All right, so concluding thoughts. Let's go with well read. What do you think?
I enjoy the art a lot, but
Yeah.
I care very little for any of the characters or settings being introduced here. It's all completely forgettable, to be quite frank. Um, but yeah, it's a very spectacular set piece, and it's nice to flip through the book and look at the imagery. But I just don't understand why there's so much time being spent going through this backstory and lore that doesn't really serve the immediate narrative. I think with storytelling, immediacy is always the most key component to put forward whenever you're writing a good story, and everything is supposed to serve that that's surrounding it. So in this case, particularly how much it jumps, it's just totally discarded. There's not even an attempt to serve any kind of central narrative. It goes from one event to another to another. They're totally disconnected, and I'm just having a lot of trouble investing, frankly. And I really hope that it turns a corner. This one at least has fewer story threads being introduced than the previous issues, which
Yeah,
really,
it was
really
bad.
went, yeah, really went into the chop suey territory. So I think here we've only got maybe 2 or 3. So better, but still not quite getting us there where we need to be.
And how about
Uh,
you, Twitless? What are your final thoughts?
um, I think the new gods do their best work when they are there are characters who are like scene stealers, right? Han Solo is great at stealing scenes, but the movie that he was in that was about him flopped. There are certain characters where like if they're stealing the attention away from your main characters, if they're doing really great supporting roles, you just love them, and you're tempted to go, "Oh, I'd love to see a movie with this guy," but that's the trap. The trap is that that role is to be the one stealing the scenes. I think the new gods are great at being DC Comics scene stealers. Like I said, Darkseid is one of the best sort of scene stealing villains you can bring up, and even some of the other quirky characters in the new gods. Like so whenever Metron shows up, you know something's going down in a
Mhm.
DC comic. Like I said, wonderful in those roles. But whenever I'm reading comics that's just about them, I it just like I said, I start to lose some of the connection. So that's always been, like I said, I think part of the thing that gate keeps me. Beautiful art. This is an issue 3, so we're still planting seeds for a narrative. And again, this comic is very much like a mini series. So I think that if I stick with it, I think the payoff may be rewarding. So I'm definitely interested to see where the payoff is. I hope the payoff isn't just taking the new gods and just taking me through a tour of all of the Joseph Campbell connections, Hero with a Thousand Faces that we can make. Because I don't know, the new gods I think are actually neat when they are pushing against that. When they're genuinely not the interesting thing for me about the new gods was I know I brought this up earlier as kind of a bad example, but the idea that when Jack Kirby came up with the personification of death, he came up with a African American man on skis is just it's something that only an American mind could just assemble and put together. And that's something about the new gods that's interesting is take an American mind that's raised on science fiction and make a mythology out of it. And not necessarily be that tied to like actual like I studied anthropology. So I'm hoping that we get something that's in the spirit of that ultimately. But and there's something with a new villain who's coming, who's invading Apocalypse. I think is leaning into that. He's definitely an alien sort of warlord. Um, so, like I said, I think I mean, I am interested to see where it's taken. Just at issue 3, I had a moment of just getting a little tired. So.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.